What do you think are some of the things that the Giants need to improve upon this offseason?
So there are a couple of different places that I can really focus on, right? Like I have a long list here of things that I believe that the Giants need to do in order to excel past what they had gone through this season. And first, I have to start with, again, I'm not doing anything in a particular order. It has to be the wide receiver core. Unfortunately, they were plagued with injuries to almost every single starting wide receiver from one, I think, all the way down to even fourth string. You had Kenny Galladay in and out of the lineup, and he has not produced since he signed in New York. He's got to go. You had their number one pick from the draft in Wendell Robinson, who tore his ACL, or their number one wide receiver pick. He did not pan out. You had Sterling Shepard tear his ACL again. Darius Slayton was in and out of the lineup. I mean, again, when it comes to the unfortunate injury bug that the Giants had, specifically in the wide receiver room, that is going to be where you need to specifically focus on getting additional depth. Now, whether or not Sterling Shepard comes back healthy, I don't know. Whether or not you release Kenny Galladay or try and find a trade suitor, I have no idea. But you had people stepping up like Richie James Jr. You obviously had people like Isaiah Hodgins step up and have big games in the playoffs. But overall, I think the Giants definitely need to address the wide receiver room. Number two, I think you're going to have some interior offensive line depth. You have Andrew Thomas at the left tackle for Daniel Jones's blind spot, but other than that, the interior protection had some slip ups this season. And Daniel Jones was forced to scramble in a lot of times, and of course, he may have decreased his turnover margin. But in terms of interior pressures, the Giants look to really break down from the center and the guard positions. I know Mark Glowinski came from the Colts, but on specifically the left side, left guard, and the center position, they weren't really able to protect a lot. I would kind of focus on building up that offensive line because he is a mobile quarterback, and it looks like they're going to extend him for the future. You are definitely going to need to bolster that up as well as help Saquon Barkley have those bigger gaps and bigger holes to go into the second level of a defense. So I would say that the offensive line is going to be next for me. And then maybe a potential third one for me. I'm kind of teetering between two here, whether that's linebacker depth, cornerback depth, or even just kind of focalizing on re-signing Saquon Barkley because of how important he is to this offense. And without him, they're kind of mediocre because again, that the wide receiver room was kind of bad. They don't necessarily have a big tight end, which again, that could technically be another highlighted position because they had a rookie, if I'm not mistaken. His name was Daniel Bellinger, that showed flashes and potential, but it wasn't necessarily something to be like, that's a tight end that's going to come out there and make a statement for you. So, like I said, the Giants have a lot of different positions that I can go for, but my two biggest ones got to be offensive line depth, specifically internally on the interior, and then additive resources within the wide receiver core.
And Kev, there's really only one more thing that I could probably hit with the Giants, and you kind of alluded to it already. What's going to happen with Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley? And we even looked at some of the reports initially about the extension that Daniel Jones could be getting. And we were seeing that he could get probably somewhere between 35 to $40 million a year with his contract extension. And for me, this is a huge point of contention for me. And it has a lot to do with get Daniel Jones signed, but get him signed for the right number to still make the team flexible to be able to improve some parts of the offense. Because as far as I see it, Kev, a lot of the issues with the Giants are mostly predicated on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, I think they got some pretty good studs on that side of the field. Look, when you got Dexter Lawrence, you got Leonard Williams, you got Adoree Jackson, like that's a good core of defensive players to work with at their disposal. And I'm of the mindset that the Giants have a really good defense, and that's the reason why they were so competitive this year. But the offense definitely needs to step up. And to me, that's where a lot of the focus is paid with Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. Because it is true that Daniel Jones had what I would consider his best year this year throughout his entire professional career. One of the things that Kevin alluded to was the amount of turnovers that he had this year compared to years past. It was definitely lower, and he's definitely progressing in that regard because he was just an absolute turnover machine in the first couple of years as a professional quarterback. And I think when it comes to contract negotiations, they have to get that number right because if they overpay for Daniel Jones, that's not a good look. Daniel Jones is what I would consider an average quarterback. And in some games, he could play to an above average standard. So I'm not of the mindset that Daniel Jones should be getting 40 million dollars a year. I just don't think that it's worth that investment long term, especially if you're going to be cap strapped based on that contract. And that's just Daniel Jones. We still got to contend with Saquon Barkley. And Saquon Barkley, when he's out there on the field, he's one of the most dynamic running backs in the game. And he had a relatively solid season this year. And the biggest thing with him, he was able to stay relatively healthy, which is something that has been nagging him throughout his first couple years in his career. So, obviously, the main point that I want to make here is that the Giants have to be smart and try to sign both of these guys in Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. But the caveat that comes along with that is they got to sign them for the right price. If they overpay for both of these guys to stay on the roster, it kind of goes to Kevin's point. They're not really going to be able to adjust this wide receiving core, which is a major issue. And when you look at their starting wide receivers on paper, Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slayton, and Richie James, Kev, I don't even know if those guys would be third string receivers on some other teams in the NFL based on what other teams have at their wide receiving cores. So, maybe this is something that Brian Dable is going to focus on over time and try to develop those guys internally and make them strong number two options and then maybe a number one down the line. Maybe they could get that from Wan'Dale Robinson in a couple years, but tearing an ACL in the first year is not a good look. So, when it comes to the Giants, they do have some things to attend to. Most of them are on the offensive side of the ball, so I agree with Kev on that one. But for me, this really comes down to securing Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley for the long term. However, it has to be for the right price. And if they overpay for both of those guys to keep them on the roster, I think it's going to significantly hinder their ability to be able to bolster this wide receiving core, which is going to be a major point of concern moving forward with the Giants because this wide receiving core, I just don't think is simply going to get it done as it's currently constructed.